Right. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you to ICONSMAT Institute of Construction Materials for organizing this session. And I'm so delighted to share with all of you here today my research project entitled Digital Innovations for Heritage Conservation, which I focuses on the use of heritage building information modeling in conserving the heritage buildings. And my case study that I conducted was specifically in Malaysia. So my name is Noor Azeyah, and you can call me Azi. I'm an assistant professor at the moment working under Faculty of Society and Design at Bond University, Gold Coast. And in Malaysia, I also own a company named Infinity FM Sdn Bhd, which we focuses on digital asset management. So my presentations today will cover the followings: the overview of heritage building conservation and traditionally how heritage building are being conserved, and how can digital approach basically improve the conservations of heritage building. And apart from this digital approach that I actually applied in my research, what are the other way forward that perhaps can be applied in conserving those buildings? And I will leave all of you here today with something for all of you to ponder. So first of all, let us look at the overview of heritage building conservation. So before I bring all of you your attention to the main output of my research project, I would like to look at the World Heritage Site as listed by UNESCO. So Asia and the Pacific are basically ranked the second with the highest number of World Heritage Sites. So in total, there are 258 sites in Asia and the Pacific as listed by UNESCO. And this comprises of 181 cultural sites, 65 natural sites, and 12 mixed site. And the reason why I chose Malaysia as my case study, because if we scope down to Malaysia, there are approximately 21,000 heritage buildings in Malaysia, and that were built in between 1800 and 1948. And according to National Heritage Act 2005 in Malaysia, how do they define heritage building? Are basically buildings that have very high valuable asset due to their historical values and tourism potentials. And so it's very paramount for this building to be conserved and by continuously caring and protecting them from being destroyed so that we can prolong their functions as well as their lifespan. It is natural that basically buildings age and when they are being exposed to serious building defects and deteriorations. So in order to conserve this building, it is very essential that we must involve effective and efficient utilizations of resources, especially talking about heritage building. The authenticity and originality of the building has to be preserved. And to keep the heritage building in good order, basically the fabric of the building and its services must be maintained. And it is not only so much about architectural considerations, but also involve the economic and social issues, as well as sustainable management of changes. So conventionally, how heritage buildings are being conserved. So looking at the good conservation practices globally, there are 5 main keys of good conservation practices, and these include minimal intervention, sustainability, minimal loss of fabric legibility, and reversibility. So minimal intervention, it focuses on the careful recording and research, and the people who are doing the conservation must respect the quality of the place, and original materials is always being preferred rather than any artificial materials to replace those element or component in a heritage building that has deteriorate and that require replacement. There must be a permanence in the finished work in terms of sustainability, and a maintenance plan must always be well defined. And talking about loss of fabric, there must be very minimum alterations, and there's beautification should be avoided. And we always prepare for least possible loss. And falsifications of element also must always be avoided. and we must allow correction for any unforeseen problems or uncertainty that might occur throughout the process. So if we try and compare the different charter throughout the world, the Bura Charter, New Zealand, Venice, Amsterdam, and Florence, each of these charter has their own practices that they focuses on. And if I go to Malaysia, which is, I call it locally because I focuses on Malaysia case study. So the good conservation practices that are being applied in Malaysia, referring to minimal intervention, conducting scientific research and laboratory testing, documentations of conservation work, and applying effective methods and techniques. So talking about minimal intervention, similarly with what I have mentioned earlier, so we must respect the existing fabric use and association and meaning, and whatever approach that we are going to apply, there must be a cautious approach, and changes that needs to be done to the building must be as little as possible. In terms of lab testing and scientific research, so there are a few methods, and basically the method must be non-destructive. So if samples are going to be taken from that particular heritage buildings or component, so this must be conducted in cautious and always ensure that it is not being destructive to any of the component. And the key element for good conservation practices in Malaysia is documentation. So the documentations can be in terms of dilapidation survey that we do to basically get the informations about what are the defects that needs to be conserved or needs to be repaired, as well as the as-built informations. So as-built information is very critical because based on this as-built information, the design or the conservation program can be basically planned effectively, as well as the cost that is necessary for the conservation work to be done can be estimated accurately. And last but not least is the methods and techniques that can be applied across. So talking about conservation plan in Malaysia, so it must be well developed and we must not jeopardize any of the future development of the building. And it must include understanding of the building. So preliminary studies, historical studies have to be conducted to understand what is the cultural, what is the significance background of that particular building. A good written policy, fair judgment in terms of vulnerability of site, and as well as it must be based on fundamental associations of that significance of heritage properties. In terms of legislation, in Malaysia, there are so many conservation legislations, act and guideline. They are being published, and if you look at the list conservation legislations here, the Malacca enactment, Johor enactment, and so on. So basically, because in Malaysia, there are few states that are very concerned about heritage since they are listed under UNESCO, and those states include Penang and Malacca. So they have their own enactment in order to basically guide the practitioners in conserving the buildings. And one of the important guideline in Malaysia is the Garis Panduan Pemuliharaan Bangunan Warisan. So this is in Malay. So basically this is a guideline to conserve the heritage building. And the principles that is being outlined by this guideline, there are 4 principles: the importance and value of the heritage, accuracy and the quality of information that must be collected, and the conservation plan or program must be achievable, and clarity of information. So these are the 4 main principles that guided this guideline. In terms of the processes in general, so it will start with preliminary studies. As I mentioned earlier, we have to identify what is the importance of those heritage structure or buildings. We have to study about its location, its historical background, the values, what is the current conditions of the building, who is the owner, is it a private or public ownership. And 2 main documentations then will be produced based on that preliminary studies, basically because the first we want to identify what is the current conditions of the building in terms of the defects, and based on that particular defects that we have recognized, then we have to propose what are the conservation methods that are appropriate to be applied. And second is the as-built information, which is basically the actual drawings and informations of the building to be used. So this as-built information, if possible, must be as accurate as possible, so that because it also involves the cost estimation. So when the as-built information is not accurate, definitely this will jeopardize the accuracy of the cost estimations that will be produced by the cost estimator. And next, forming the work scope. So based on these informations that we have, we can then prepare our action plan and what are the work scope that is going to be involved in the conservation. And last but not least, during the implementations of the conservation program, the management of the building and the site, reporting and recording of informations. And talking about conservation approach, it does not only concern about conservation, it also includes preservations, like we avoid any defects or deteriorations to happen by monitoring and controlling the components and elements. Prevention, we control the humidity, protection from fire, any vandalism, and so on. It also includes consolidation, restoration work, reproduction, renovations, and maintenance. So these are the different approaches of conservation's approach. And based on my research, basically, these are the elements that are commonly defective in heritage buildings. So it includes doors and windows, ceiling painting, roof, rainwater downpipe, wall, plasterwork, decoration, floor, and staircase. And the elements that I circled basically are the most common or the most frequent defective element found in heritage building in Malaysia. So because, for example, in Malaysia, because of the climate and the weather in Malaysia, and the doors and windows in historic buildings are typically made of timber or wood. So basically, majority of the heritage building in Malaysia happens to be that the doors and windows are missing, broken, or even deteriorated. So what are the factors that that we need to consider and are very significant for effective conservations? Basically, it includes a definitely substantial amount of money. So the clients must be convinced that some fund needs to be provided for the conservation work to be conducted. And what are the resources, materials that we have? So basically, as we focus on minimal loss of fabric and minimal intervention, so we must focus on finding the original materials for us to replace any broken components or any defective components. It's different from new building works, because talking about new building works, usually it starts from bottom to top, from the foundations to the roof level, but this one starts from the top to bottom, and we focuses on those items that are visible to our eyes rather than changing the structural look or structural form of the building. And responsibilities, roles, and teams. So who are the parties involved in the conservation work? They must be working together, and information must be exchanged in an effective manner so that everyone is aware on what are the program and how much it's going to cost. Skilled and unskilled workers, direction, idea, and solver, as well as last but not least, the safety, health and safety considerations, because talking about heritage building in Malaysia, at least 60% of them are in very major defects. So issues surrounding conservation, this is what I found based on my research in Malaysia. First is it is not being prioritized by the owner, and they tend to have lack of understanding and appreciations of the value of heritage buildings. And also allocations of money is one of the another issues that they are very concerned with. So apart from that, absence of enforcement by authorities, we basically focuses only on services rather than architectural. The quality of work, because of lack of tradesmen in Malaysia, and lack of knowledge and skill, not enough incentive, lack of technical skills and expertise, and non-existence of guideline and plan, apart from those that I have listed in my slides earlier. And if I can summarize the entire issues that I found based on my research, basically can divide it into 5: technical, management, human, financial, environmental, where basically technical, it focuses on the maintainability analysis. Basically, life cycle cost or life cycle cost analysis is not being applied or used. And technicality in terms of finding the original materials to replace the defective components, that's another issue. And then typically the practitioners tend to use a substandard material, which causes lack of quality in terms of the originality and authenticity of the building. And as built informations that is prepared by the designers or the conservations personnel basically are not reflecting the real status or actual conditions of the building. And in terms of management, poor management, we're talking about lack of coordination basically between the management, the costing group, as well as the design group. Human issues relates back to the lack of technical skills and expertise. Financial issues basically relates back to the inaccuracy of the as-built information that leads to inaccurate estimations of the cost for conservation. And last but not least is the environmental. So basically talking about demands for new development is actually higher than the demands for balancing the existing properties or buildings that are available in Malaysia. And based on analysis with 209 heritage buildings in Malaysia, majority of the buildings are actually occupied, and most of the buildings are not being conserved properly. 74% of those buildings, 61% although are being occupied are in very poor conditions, and 83% are basically comprised of major building defects. So in terms of quantity surveying perspective, so this is another research that I conducted with one of my students, and we found that basically based on quantity surveying perspective or the cost planner perspective, they perceive conservation work to be very risky compared to new building works, and because of the non-standard scope of work, and different buildings will require different nature of work, and you can't simply benchmark it with any other similar projects. And so it is not sufficient for QS to just use any documentations that based on new building work. So basically they have to work on a new system and a new approach to basically produce an accurate cost estimations for that. So currently what's happening in Malaysia, the ill-prepared document for conservations of heritage building basically has caused cost overrun and contractual disputes. And in terms of severity index of those issues that we have identified in this research, basically informations related. And if I can summarize it, so we're talking about informations that is being supplied to the quantity surveyors are not accurate, and hence whatever that is being produced are not reliable, and this actually contributes to the very low satisfaction on behalf of the clients in terms of the conservation work, which is 0.794. So conventionally, how heritage buildings are being conserved. So we do historical research, the preliminary studies in terms of finding what are the source of data that we have. Perhaps we have original drawing, any historical photos, report, and research aspect. And then we prepare the documentation. So looking into the measured drawing, found drawing, or any other type of drawing, dilapidation survey, and based on the dilapidation survey, dilapidation report will be produced. Then material structure analysis report in terms of methods and inventory. Preliminary conservation work basically focuses on cleaning the site and do some recording before we do the actual conservation. Selections of compatible material or original materials that can be used, and any consolidation work that is necessary. And once the conservation work has started, that will include different type of work, reconstruction, preservation, and so on. And final report will be produced. So this is conventionally how it is going to be done. And based on my research earlier, basically most of the issues arise at the documentation stage, where the documentation is being recorded manually, and the survey is being done manually on site by the designers and conservation personnel. So digitally, how can these issues be improved, and what are the things that we can look into having all those digital innovations and platform in place? So talking about heritage building informations modeling, this is the digital technologies that is capable of automating all the processes that has been traditionally being done manually, collection and processing of measurement data. So it uses laser techniques so that we can determine range and geometry, produce digital photo modeling, for the heritage building, and then this collected data in digital format can then be computed into a software so that the building and its environment can be modeled virtually. So the benefits of heritage building information modeling, basically we can review the building by not being physically on the site. We can review it remotely, and it allows study with new structures and any possible work that we would like to propose. Possibility to survey of different periods of time. So based on my experience, when I did this approach to one of the building in our case study, basically I did it in 3 days. So I can do it in different periods of time, and better estimations of the structure, basically because whatever data is being captured automatically based on the GPS coordinate and based on the scales, and I don't have to change it, or I don't have to manually input it in, and allow appreciations of renovation adaptations documentations. And basically, if we have the virtual model, it's very easy for people to understand the 3D model rather than looking at a 2D drawing and so on. So the pillars of HBIM, there are 4 main pillars of HBIM. First is the people. So it's either they are specialists or non-specialists. So their roles will be different. Or some people will be doing the extracting of informations, updating or modifying the informations within an informations model. But basically having a platform that informations can be exchanged easily. So this makes people to become more effective and team working, collaborations, and this make informed decisions making to be there. And in terms of technology, software and hardware, so there are lots of software and hardware. For example, in my research here, so we use Autodesk Revit, Scene software for laser scanning techniques. We also use other type of software like CosX, Glodon, as well as Vico for cost estimating and others. And in terms of hardware, it requires a quite advanced hardware, as the data that we collected are typically it needs to be supported by very high spec of computers, processes, modeling. So once the model has been produced and how the model is going to be integrated with other processes. For instances, the designed model that has been produced must be well integrated with services as well as the costing process and the policies. So perhaps the manual policies or the existing policies that are available can be used as a guidelines, but having HBIM in place, an automated policy has to be there in order to show the mandates and also protocols to guide all the practitioners in the industry. So HBIM workflow, I divided it into 2. So one is based on the heritage data. Basically, when I collected all the informations and background of that particular building, tangible and intangible elements. And second is based on laser scan survey. So basically talking about the procedural and segmental model that I did from the 3D laser scanning technique. So to summarize the HBIM processes in total, it starts with data collection. So the data collection process started with surveying of the historical buildings. So we will basically, based on a plan, if there is no existing drawing at all, then an outline of the plan has to be produced for us to do the survey. And we then apply the surveying, high definition surveying methodologies, basically based on image-based or non-image-based. And the project that I'm going to present after this is basically a non-image-based approach where we apply the laser scanning approaches. And it helps us to basically produce a range-based modeling. So based on the data collection and the laser scanning approach that we have applied, we process the data. So the data, when we process the data, we integrated the historic data of the building together with the 3D model that we generated from that surveying data, and we built the parametric objects library. And last but not least, after we have processed the data, we then synthesize the data and create the HB model and produce all the full drawings of the 3D documentations that include orthographics, section details, and any schedules. So HBIM globally, this is one of the project Basilica di Colle Maggio. So what happened to this building was that it was badly damaged due to earthquake in 2009. And so the project was funded by Any Servisi. Basically, it involved multidisciplinary consultants. They are working together to basically repair and conserve the structure of the building. And but because of the complexity of this particular building, they have a very severe defect, especially in terms of cracking. So they decided to use HBIM platform, and what they have produced, basically they try to reproduce the geometric irregularities of that particular building using image-based method as well as laser scanning techniques, where 182 laser scan have been captured for this particular building. I'm so sorry. Okay. And so you can see that these are some of the illustrations of the cracking, severe cracking. So everything can be identified based on the different calibrated cameras and creations, inclusions of orthophotos to HBIM. They acquire very large number of 3D data, and wide range of point clouds data can be directly used. Okay. As I mentioned, because it involves multidisciplinary team, this technique allows interoperability. So this is how they use, how they do the structural studies using Rhino, as well as economic management, WBS, and they do continuous evaluations and monitoring. Apart from that case study, so these are another case studies that you might want to look into: the Nasif Historical House in Jeddah, the Maggio, and also the Papa Basilica of San Francis by Angelini and others. So locally, what I actually applied to my case study, so this is the actual building that I went to scan. It is actually an old palace of the Royal of Johor, one state in Malaysia. Then I apply the 3D laser scanning technique and try to produce the point cloud data accordingly. And based on that point cloud data, I integrated it with parametric geometry. I look at the relationship and collaborations, and a digital building is being produced at the end of the day. So this is just a sample of that particular building that I went. So this is based on the point cloud data, a total of 276 million points of project point cloud was generated based on 43 scans. So you can see that the tiny dots basically represents the point cloud data that has been captured, and it was done in I think about 6 hours to basically scan the entire building, external and internal. Okay, so you can see that basically the building condition is very poor, and in terms of safety and health, it's very inconvenience for many consultants to work within the building. So it allows visual modeling of the building. We don't have to be physically in the building. And this is another case study that I've conducted. This is a Chinese temple, which is also located in Johor. 20 scan, we did it in 4 hours, and a total of 148 millions of project point cloud was generated. And the thing about this Chinese temple is that they don't have any existing drawings. So when they are trying to conserve it, typically the cost or the fees being charged to the conservation is very high due to the complexity of the design of the roofing structures especially. So we managed to produce the drawing and presented it to the owner of the temple. Another one is Museum Toko. So this is the building that I would like to present to all of you today. So similarly, what we did, I applied the innovated approach that I presented earlier. So we did a walkthrough survey, then we do planning of the layout, and we try to identify how many scan points that we have to do. So using the 3D laser scanning technique, we did the 360 degrees laser scanning vertically and horizontally. A drone is not used for this project because the building is only a double-story building. And based on that, we did some archive study, communities interview with those protectors of the building. We filter the data accordingly based on georeferencing of data. We stitch the data, we remove all the noise, because when we scan the entire building, the trees or anything that is visible on the site will be captured as well. So noise removal, and we import the data automatically. And then we create the HBIM with 3D documentations, and a model is then being produced accordingly. So these are some of the photos of the work that we have done at that particular site. So the output from this study, basically, as I mentioned, I focuses more on documentations level because this is one of the main issues in conservations of work. And you can see that we managed to produce as-built information with very minimal effort, and at micro level, the accuracy of as-built information is being guaranteed. And based on that as-built information, we managed to do the redesigning. We provide alternative of options, cost estimations, visualizations, and 3D printing. At macro level, we can help the society to appreciate the values of the heritage building and enhance our professional practices, and we return back the benefits to tourism. So the way forward, first, based on that model, we basically use VR. So what we did basically, we allow the clients to experience the virtual reality of that particular building in its actual condition, as well as after we have basically propose the changes or conservation work that we would like to do, so he can see what are the differences between the actual conditions and what we are going to propose. And in terms of health and safety, we avoid any issues that is relating to that, because they can view the building virtually. And also augmented reality, because Malaysia is looking at into promoting its tourism potentials. So having augmented reality using informations that we receive from archaeologists, architect, historians, and so on, we managed to embed these informations into a mobile, so that before a person can come in and visit Malaysia, they can basically have the experience on what are the buildings and what are the historical background of those buildings. 3D printing, basically, because I'm talking about having the originality or authenticity of that particular building. So based on this process, we managed to basically print out the components to replace the original materials using 3D printing. So based on the model that we have created, and we convert it into a solid model. So based on that solid model, we can print the component accordingly, and that component that has been printed can then be installed accordingly on the site. So moving forward, so what I would like to venture more, and perhaps any of you would like to look into BIM for existing building and structures. So not only for heritage building, but nowadays facilities management and asset management has been an argument around the world by so many researchers talking about, because we never consider about the cost that we have to spend for facilities management. We only focuses on the initial cost, that how much that we need to basically construct a building. So this is one of the approach that perhaps can be applied. And also scope expansion, as it requires a multidisciplinary approach, and it gives us more potential for us to improve our current practices. So last but not least, something for all of you to ponder. I know that everyone is aware on 15 April last year, the Notre Dame in Paris was on fire. And what they did, basically, they used digital scan and data that happened to be like being scanned by someone. And using that data on 28 June 2019, this is actually a video. I don't mind sharing this slide with all of you because I only have 1 minute 40 seconds left. So they managed to restore it back in just within a couple of months, having this digital innovations and tool in place. And so last but not least, I would leave all of you with a quote: whatever good things that we build end up building us. So thank you very much. And hope to see you all in other occasions. Thank you very much. Any questions, I'm happy to answer.
So thank you so much for all these interesting